Okay, well, I would like to introduce you all to our speaker today, Lyssa deHart. Lyssa is a mentor coach and she is an ICF assessor. So we will be in very good hands today. She's also the author of two books, Storyjacking, and one that she just released called The Reflective Coach, a 12-month exploration. And I am really excited to get reading it. Also, she's just finished recording the 25th episode of her podcast, The Coaching Studio. So Lyssa has constant practice with coaching and teaching others to coach. And in fact, she spoke to us last year, and I personally so enjoyed it that I reached out to her and hired her as my coach. And she is my mentor coach. So I'm so excited to share her with you today. One of the things that I particularly love about working with Lyssa and going through some of her courses is how she uses metaphor in the coaching conversation to help people go deeper without making it stressful. It's kind of like a safe and creative way to really make some incredible progress. And I was blown away when she kind of began to share this with us. So I'm really excited that you're all here today and you'll be able to see her in action. Lyssa, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really, really appreciate it. Super excited to have you. And I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very, very happy to be here with you all. Lori, was that you holding up the book? Too funny. So today, you're in the right place if what you're looking for is the power of metaphors. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Hold on. And let me get it into the right. Can everybody see the first slide? Thumbs up. All right. So if you're here, we're in the right place. Power of metaphors. I love metaphors, and I think you're going to find that I really, really love metaphors as we go through this training today. But we use metaphors far more often than we even imagine we do. And they show up anytime we are trying to describe any sort of abstract ideas. When we're talking about our feelings, thoughts, emotions, we conceptualize them through the language of metaphors. And I think it's really important because what this invites coaches to do is to begin the process of tuning your ears to actually listen for the metaphors that your clients are bringing up, not just to notice the metaphors, but then also how do we utilize these metaphors in ways that are congruent to holding the coaching conversation and creating. Sometimes I use metaphors to create the container, like what are we talking about and what's important and what would be different by the end of the conversation. But they can also show up in the middle of a conversation, which really allows us to explore, a bit to Nahid's point, in a more creative way, an elegant way of having a deeper conversation without trying to solve for a problem. And I think that metaphors offer us that, and we'll go more into that. So this is a moment for you to feel free to take yourself off of speaker or throw something in the chat if you'd like. But what are the reasons people need coaches in your mind? Why do we do what we do?
Lyssa, I wanted to let you know that the view we have right now is, I think, the presenter's view.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think
Try
so.
it again.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Is that the
yes.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Well, as you can see, I don't have any notes yet, so we're good. But again, what are the reasons people need coaches? And let me go find the chat again. They're in transition, adds perspective, accelerating their growth, often at a crossroads seeking clarity. Yeah, a space to explore, to step outside their box, explore their thinking, to become aware of blind spots, absolutely, reinvent themselves, get unstuck. That's a great one. Such a metaphor clients come to us with, right? I feel stuck. That is a metaphor all by itself. We tend to go, oh, okay, great. So, let's get you unstuck, but we don't really explore what does stuck look like for them if from a metaphorical space, transformation, perspective. And I got to go back and see what Wendy said. There to crossroads. Yeah, it is a good one. Coaches help with blind spots, another metaphor. They're getting unstuck, making decisions. I think that for muted. I'm not sure how I got muted, but I think one of the things that shows up for me often with why people need coaches is because there is a lot of information out there that we can just garner through YouTube or through a Google search, right? But what we can't do is have this sort of dialogue with another human being who's really present with us to explore what are the words, what is the energy shifting, what is the language and the meaning that we are making. We can't do that on an app. We cannot do that on a Google search. And so for me, what listening differently does is it really increases partnership. And I think that for one of the things that I love about metaphors so much is that they support coaches and people to do that deeper exploration as to not what steps do you need to do to get unstuck, but rather what drives the stuck? What's keeping you stuck? What does that mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like when you're stuck? And, people might say, I feel like I'm like stuck in mud, or, I've had clients who I feel like I'm wrestling with these ideas all the time. I don't know which direction to go. So wrestling ends up being a metaphor that people use. And if you weren't wrestling with these concepts or ideas, what would you be doing instead? Might be at ease, or feeling more flexible, or I'm going to engage a superpower, all metaphorical responses. So in our presentation today, I want to talk about some of the things that I think are important about what metaphors allow us. This idea of embodiment as idea containers. I'm going to share with you some of the neuroscience behind metaphors with the competencies. And then I have a demonstration, and that is what Nanora was talking about we're going to pause during that because I want to protect the confidentiality of the client who shared that particular call with me and who's given me permission to use it for education, but I don't want it on YouTube. So we'll pause at that point. You guys will listen, and then we'll press on with the other exercises. So embodiment, when you think of embodiment, and I'm not seeing these, chat is going fast. Yeah, I wasn't intentionally using Wendy. There you go. See, we don't intentionally use metaphors. They are natural to the way that we communicate with other people. But the thing that metaphors allow us to do also is we have an opportunity to embody learning. One of the experiences that I've had with this is that I was working with a client from Boeing, and he had just come into the organization and he was getting to know his boss, and his whole team was coming together. The boss was coming, and as he was talking, I'm like, what do you foresee of this luncheon that he was talking about doing? And he's like, I just really want to figure out, what they're looking for in their casserole. And I'm like, because we're talking about a luncheon that he was going to do prior to COVID. And I started laughing. And I'm like, tell me more about this casserole. And he starts putting in, like, every client that he has, every customer that he has to come up with a specific kind of casserole for that particular client. And he'd never really thought about it that way. He'd said it, but he hadn't really embodied that understanding of that's what he's doing. And so he's a guy who really liked to cook a lot. And so casserole was sort of an easy a way of expressing what he was doing, but he's bringing in all these different ingredients to make a particular dish for a particular person. And when I talked to him, like a year and a half after we had finished our work together, he was still talking about the casserole. And in fact, the casserole idea had really extrapolated out to his entire team. And every time they got together for team meeting regarding the new customer that was coming forward, they were talking about what kind of casserole do we need to make for this particular client. And so that is an embodiment of an idea at a very deep level that transformed the way that his team was thinking about how they were bringing work together, but also it neutralizes if something is a good idea or a bad idea. It may need pepper, but if you put too much pepper in it, it may be too much pepper, right? So good branding, yeah. And it becomes this way of really having the client remember an idea that they had. How many times has a client said to you something and then you fast forward 2, 3, 6, however many sessions forward, they're still running around the same hamster wheel. This happens, right? Where they can't get over it because something hasn't been acknowledged or anchored for them. And so metaphors are a way of embodying and anchoring awareness. They also really demonstrate an internal process. They externalize an internal process. They externalize what a person's brain is doing. And I use metaphors in a multitude of ways, but I think that bringing them out and exploring them when we hear them, what they mean to the client, really gives us a much more sense of we're listening at a very deep level. But the other thing that it does is it invites the client to think about the things that they're saying with their own new listening, their own new ears. And in that way, they are anchoring their own insights and awarenesses. So fundamentally, metaphors are idea containers, right? Just at a broad stroke, they make the abstract accessible. So if we're running out of time, like all of us know, if we're running out of time, we're not actually running out of time, but it is the way that when you say that, everybody has a common experience of this idea of whatever running out of time is. It may be different for each of us. So it's a place to be curious and not make an assumption, yet we all have a kind of an understanding of it. And it makes it something visual for us. Lakoff and Johnson's research discovered that metaphors are not accidental. They are not randomly used. They are unconsciously used. To Wendy's point, she wasn't trying to use a metaphor, but they are not accidental. We draw on the metaphors that light up the parts of our brain that are lit up at that moment. And so they are a way of making conscious the unconscious thought process that's going on with a human being. And so here's sort of the neuroscience. Our brains are wired for stories, and metaphors create a visual story. And when you think back to early human beings, we lived in caves and we created cave paintings. And our earliest language was really about explaining the world around us through imagery. And if you even think about like small children, the words and the pictures are linked completely because the pictures are automatic understanding, whereas the words are, abstract ideas. And so we create a connection. So our brain is wired in this way already for a myriad of reasons. What they discovered is that in the brain structure, there are thousands of mapping circuits that are aligned for metaphors. Our brains just light up to different metaphors. When we hear one that's powerful, we go, hey, that was kind of interesting. We use them unconsciously all the time. They are central to language, and the more that I said look for them, but really listen for them, the more that you're going to see or hear them. They are everywhere. And they offer us a pathway to a new perspective. A lot of young coaches will get very fixated on solving problems. And so they get very strategic and task-oriented in their exploration of the problem. I want to help you fix your problem, whatever that is. And so we're going to come up with some steps that are going to lead you to a solution to your problem. What metaphors do is they offer us a way of exploring the problem from a different angle. Most people, and I don't know how many people in here have ever been in a relationship with another person where they've had like a long-term relationship with that person. Most of us don't even need the other person anymore to have the argument, right? Like if I am thinking of something that I'm going to talk to my husband about, I don't even actually need him in the room anymore to have the whole entire conversation with him that I might have, because I know what I'm going to say. I have a sense of what he's going to say. And so we get into a habit of how we think about things. And by exploring metaphors, what a coach does is invites the client to step out of the unconscious habitual way that they talk about something and explore it in a whole new way. So I want to stop here and just get a sense from you guys, what's showing up for people as you're hearing this. And please feel free to take yourself off mute. Is this making sense? Okay. I hear somebody coming off mute. Who's joining me?
Might be me. I just took myself off mute. Graydon.
Graydon.
Hi there. Yeah, what's coming up for me is I'd also just finished my HSP certification, and I am an HSP. So all of this is really resonating really strongly for HSPs, which process all of this information even more deeply than non-HSPs. So 30 to 50% of your clients are going to be using these metaphors in a way that is really deeply and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's coming up for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, it does, because different metaphors light up different regions of our brain. And so that's the second piece of the neuroscience, which is using fundamental, these functional magnetic resonating images. What they did was they started to throw out different metaphors. And what they discovered was different metaphors had the ability to light up different regions of the brain. And there's some like this one, like nails on a chalkboard. Who here hears that and doesn't have like a little bit of a cringe-worthy experience? Yeah, I'm like, oh. I even writing it and looking at it makes me uncomfortable. I think it's also this idea of, like sour lemon. Like we don't need to be eating a sour lemon to have that visceral response to a sour lemon. Or my eyes feel like sandpaper, or it's been a rough day. Like these are visceral experiences that people begin to have. And so again, this idea of embodiment, because you're feeling it in more than just your head, it is a full sensory sort of experience. But it also, they light up different structures of the brain. And this makes perfect sense from a evolutionary standpoint. So here are the 4 conceptual metaphors that light up our brains. Thinking is moving. So moving is the metaphor. Ideas are locations we're moving through. The idea of stuck is a location. So this is a thinking is a moving through something. If we're going to move through stuck, where are we moving towards, right? It is leading, it is following, it is all kinds of things. Thinking is seeing. Ideas are things that are seen. So people will say, as I'm looking across the landscape, or as I've got my eyes on the horizon point, they're talking about the visual aspect of how they are envisioning something, right? Thinking is object manipulation. I used one earlier where I have a client who often has said, I feel like I'm wrestling with this, or it feels like a walk or a slog, right? These things are movement. Oh, that's a movement. Sorry, we're on object manipulation. So the wrestling or grasping at straws or not knowing what thread to pull. These are things that show up commonly in conversations. And then the final one is thinking is eating. Ideas are food. And so in my example, I use a very full plate. It became the metaphor to which the work was done around. And the reason this fits with the evolutionary history of human beings is when you think about early people, what are the things that were most important for survival? The ability to move through the landscape was pivotal. The ability to see across the horizon line, to pay attention to their environment, the ability to manipulate things. I mean, if we didn't learn how to manipulate things, we wouldn't even be listening to this on a computer, let alone sitting in chairs in, you know, houses that have furniture and all the different things that we've done to manipulate the world around us. The very first human wouldn't have picked up the very first rock and thrown it at somebody, right? So manipulation is crucial to human development. And then survival thinking is eating. I actually have no research for this, but I do believe it, that there's a fifth one, but these guys didn't come up with it. But I really think that there's one also around birth. And we'll hear people talk about this idea of, you know, this idea that I'm my baby, you know, anybody who's written a book is like, oh, my baby, I just published my baby and now I'm gonna have to work for the next, you know, 10 years to try and get people to buy it. Or this program is, you know, is my baby, or I've just given birth to this big idea. So I really think there's something to that being a fifth conceptual metaphor, but there is no research there, only my experience and sense of it. But as you're hearing this, these four conceptual metaphors, when people are talking, it's a really important thing then to start to pay attention. Their brain just lit up to this if they brought it forward. And this is crucial too. Coaches use metaphors and they will plant metaphors for clients. Like, I think that I need to use a metaphor here. Like, this is what it seems like to me. It seems like you've got an anchor that's dragging you, you know, you're dragging behind you. And the client may go, yeah, maybe, right? They may go, oh my gosh, yeah, that's exactly it. It's an anchor that I'm dragging. But if they don't have a big reaction to it, invite them to name what it feels like to them instead. Because we want their brain to light up to this. Like, it's great when the coach's brain lights up, but it's not as important as the client's brain lighting up. So we want their brain to light up to the metaphor that they are using. And so, so we're paying attention though to things that seem like they're moving, being envisioned, manipulated, or have to do with food specifically. And I would throw in the whole birth idea. So interesting how these metaphor elements tie into, I'm not sure what VAK is, perceptions, potentially a metaphor for death as well, the other side of the birth coin. And I agree with that. I mean, I think oftentimes with things like endings, right? Like the severing and the grieving, that would be another one. So maybe we have a sixth one. Stealing that, just so you know, Daniel, taking that. But it is so important because it's so important that the client owns it. And I'll give you an example of that. I was working with a Chinese client and she was talking about writing a book. It was what the work was that we were doing. And I said to her, I feel like as you're talking that there's this like this path that's in front of us for our conversation today. I'm seeing us walking down a path. What are you noticing? And she goes, oh no, it's not a path. In China, we say you cross a river by feeling the stones. And I was just stunned by the beauty of that metaphor. But I said, is that what we're doing in our conversation today? Crossing a river? She goes, that's what we're doing today. We're crossing a river. She was all lit up for this idea. And I said, what is the first stone we need to feel? Right? I'm asking her to direct me across this river. I don't know where we're going across the river, but she was so lit up to crossing a river and using the stones that we needed to feel across the river led us through the conversation. What's the first stone to be felt? What's the next stone to be felt? What's the next stone? Are there any other stones that still need to be felt as you're coming to the other side of this river? What do you have as a result of these stones that you've uncovered and felt? right? And anybody who's ever done anything like walk across a river or fly fish or any number of things that got you in somewhat deep water knows that while it may look kind of calm on the surface, there's stones you have to, navigate usually in rivers to feel. So there's also this embodiment of this experience. We can put ourselves in the shoes of somebody crossing a river, feeling the stones along the way, and the care that might require to notice each one as we go so that we don't have our feet swept out from below us. Yeah, maybe even being weighted down, right? Is there a ranking of these types? Are some more helpful than others? I don't see a ranking like one is better than the other. What I see is it tells you where the client's brain is lighting up right now. That's what it tells you. And so it gives you a window into where their head is. And if they're talking about, manipulating things like wrestling, we want to stay with that wrestling concept. We don't want to say, it sounds like you're overwhelmed and, like you have a really full plate. Like that would be really dismissive of the metaphor that they brought forward. We also don't want them to explain the metaphor to us. We don't need them to, like, you just said you wanted to cross a river by feeling the stones. Tell me more about what that even means to you, because what we might do then is have them start to explain to us this metaphor, and it's kind of like a good joke. If you have to explain it, it's not so good anymore, right? Like it takes them from the flow that they were getting into and moves them into having to explain it to you, the coach. But it is okay for the coach to say something like, I'm hearing this, there seems to be some real power behind crossing a river. Is that what we're doing? Right? And the client is going, yeah, that's what we need to do, is we need to cross a river. Let's see here. Whoops, I think I went too fast. So some examples of this, and you'll see this in the breakout, we'll go into some of these things, but example of a client bringing forward something. I'm working on my podcast, and I think it'd be helpful to figure out some of the barriers that are stopping me from moving forward. I mean, there's metaphors all over that if you just listen to it, right? There's this barrier, there's barriers that are stopping her and blocking her from moving forward. So at that point, that's a really curious thing. That idea of motion and movement is being stopped. So if we know that and the client says something like that, then we might say, then in this conversation, what might lower the barrier? Is that, or what would you like to do with the barrier that's stopping you from moving forward? Is that where you'd like to spend your time today, right? We're getting clarity around what's important to the client, but we're listening to the language that they're using. Here's another one. I'd like to figure out what I'd like to figure out is how to find what's alive in the work for me, not just about being of service, but it feels very chaotic and I don't know which thread to grab. Right? I would be very curious, and this might be a place of where we're asking, what does this mean? Like, what does alive mean? That kind of goes along with that birth and death metaphors, right? Of the two sides of that particular coin. What does that even mean to have the work be alive for you? And the client is then at choice to determine what that even means to them. And they may have used this languaging a bunch of times, but never really listened to it themselves because they're just having the habitual conversation in their head with themselves. The biggest thing I've noticed is a lack of concrete pressure. It feels like I'm behind, like the whole imposter syndrome of, well, I've done this before. Why is this not working this time? Instead, I've anchored on getting stuck and I shouldn't be getting stuck. Right? There's a bunch of different places. Like, what is it to have concrete pressure? What does that even mean? What is, imposter syndrome? We have a tendency, because it's talked about so much in our culture, to make an assumption of what that means. Oh, imposter syndrome, of course. What does imposter syndrome in this situation mean to you specifically? It's a place to get curious. And this idea of anchored on getting stuck. If you weren't anchored on getting stuck, what would you want to be doing with the stuck? So we're starting to explore using their language. I don't need to say, when you say anchored on getting stuck, what does anchored on getting stuck mean exactly? But I can just summarize it very quickly. If you weren't getting anchored, what would it look like instead? Or what would it be like instead? And each of these are just sort of examples. There's not a right or wrong question to follow up with, but there are places to get curious with clients. And depending on where we are in the conversation, if we're in the agreement setting piece of the conversation, we might be using this to anchor the client to what they want to get from the conversation. We might be, what's important about this awareness of getting anchored on getting stuck and getting unstuck. Like, what would you like to have by the end of the conversation? In the middle of the conversation, it might really be around exploring, below the surface of what that means. Like, what is imposter syndrome? Like, I might be going deeper into that. I might come back to it later. Like earlier, you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I'm curious how that relates to what you're talking about now, later in the conversation. And then at the end, as we're facilitating client growth, what we could be doing is saying, as we talk today, what have you noticed in this conversation that has allowed you to maybe unanchor yourself? Or, how did we do it grabbing the threads that were important to you? We can continue to utilize the language that the client brought forward, which really demonstrates a deep level of listening, but also their brain is already lit up to this language because they brought it forward. So I want to just stop here real quick and just get a sense from folks, what's showing up? How would you connect aliveness to the threads? I wouldn't connect aliveness to the threads, but I might say to the client, I'm hearing this idea of aliveness, and then I'm hearing this multiple threads. What is the connection, if any, for you? And I think this is it also. We as coaches don't have to work hard to make the meaning and connect the dots. We work way too hard trying to make meaning for our clients. And so it's a much more easeful coaching when instead I go, I heard this word about like alive work, and then I'm hearing threads to grab, and I'm curious what the connection is for you. And let the client make the meaning. Let them determine what's important or which threads that need to be grabbed first. I see Nahid laughing. I had a client once say, I'm not good at metaphors. It's just not in my wheelhouse. Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. And that's it too. Like, there are some caveats to this. If you're working with people who are on the spectrum, I guess we're all on the spectrum, but are sort of at the edge of the spectrum for like autism, sometimes they are so concrete in their thinking and so literal in the way that they conceive of things that metaphors, they may be sharing them, but it's kind of like a joke. They don't necessarily, their brain doesn't work like that. So know your client also. But most clients use them just naturally. And so, we can just sit with them and just wait for it to sink in. Another metaphor. I love that. I suppose there's a good amount of common language that I don't think to be metaphors, but they are. Allison, that's the secret. They're everywhere, but we're not paying attention to them like that. So we just sort of take them for granted because they are such common ways of speaking about things that we just make assumptions of meaning. And when you think about like cultural competence, and you think about the fact that even if somebody looks just like me, we grew up in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and we grew up with different, beliefs and values. The way that I use something and the way that somebody who looks identical to me uses something could be miles apart. And this is the place of partnership in coaching, where we're really inviting ourselves to let go of our automatic assumptions and be curious for the benefit of the client, not curious for myself. Like, what would it, so what do you think the steps are that you need to get to the book that you want to write, right? Or what's in the way of you writing this book? We can explore it through the stones and let the client direct what's most important. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts as we're doing this? Object manipulation, an example of that might be, well, I've been building walls or I'm trying to create healthy boundaries. That would be a example of building something, which is an object manipulation. I think that, you know, I always think of like wrestling is an object manipulation, but I don't know that it always is. Things like that. Any other people have ideas on what might be examples of object? Looking at the stones as object manipulation. Too many things on my plate, taking them off. Yeah, I need to open the door on this, pulling threads. I love the pulling threads one because oftentimes, especially in the beginning, if the client comes with a huge download of information, I might say something to the effect of, you know, there's many threads have been brought forward. Is there any in particular that are most important for our conversation today? Look at you guys piling on rocks, pulling threads, planting seeds, spinning plates, juggling. Yeah, juggling is a big one. Pushing a boulder up a hill, absolutely. Yeah, tying knots and untying knots, right? Driving the boat, driving the car, taking our hands off the wheel. Yeah, swim lanes. Yeah, so they're just everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. It's hilarious. Pulling myself up by my bootstraps. Yeah, exactly. So, and again, I mean, I really love the fact that they're cross-cultural, because even if I haven't heard the metaphor, like I'd never heard the metaphor of you cross a river by feeling the stones, but as soon as she said it, I had a sense of it. And as soon as I heard it, I was blown away by what I felt was probably one of the most beautiful metaphors that I had just been dumped in my lap, that I really felt the need to invite the client to, is that what we're doing? Tell me more about what it would be then if we're crossing this river. But they make these visible concepts easy to be communicated. I know we're going on a journey. I know we're crossing a river. I know we're checking out stones and looking at them, which also byproduct of that is I get to check in with the client all the way through the conversation. How many times have you been doing a coaching demonstration and gone at the very last minute, so how did we do in getting to what was important to you in this conversation, where we could have been checking in all the way along the way? What's next? What's the next stone to unturn? What's the next thread that needs to be tugged on? Right? What's the next needle that needs to be threaded? Whatever the metaphor is that showed up for the client, we could be checking in with them all the way through the conversation. Yeah, that one. I recently, a client said, I feel like I'm walking through knee-deep mud. I mean, that's a slog, right? Like we can empathize with what that might feel like. And then it becomes, what's the experience that we need to be exploring in order to get you to a different experience than slogging through mud, right? What needs to be explored on our way there? I think that metaphors allow us to dig into meaning. I think that they really help us not only explore meaning, but integrate new thinking. They take us out of this solving problem. Like you don't solve walking through deep mud, you explore it. She's not literally in mud, or he's not literally in mud at that moment. So there's nothing for me to solve for. It becomes this way of really opening up the exploration and being curious, letting go of my assumptions that I know what that means. And that, okay, well, now that it's said, it doesn't matter because it was already said, but rather as a place to explore and shift the way that we're looking at things that we habitually think. Increases understanding. I think it's so much fun, but it really boosts creative thinking. Like the client with the casserole dish. I mean, he had several that came up. He had one that showed up with his kids where he was like, I feel like I'm not having fun with them anymore. And he goes, I need to look for those blow up moments. And I'm like, are you talking about Airplane? Like, this is aging me, I'm sure. But remember the guy in the movie Airplane, there was this blow up doll that like blows up and he's a pilot or something like that. He thought that was the most hilarious thing ever. And so we just are laughing about these blow up moments that show up, and how to have fun with your kids and look for these blow up moments, right? Like he remembered that. Frankly, I remember it, and it's been years since I worked with this person. And I hadn't thought of Airplane in I don't know, since it came out. It wasn't like my kind of movie when I was a kid. I liked other kinds of movies. But it really allows us to explore insights and expand awareness. And so to that end, we end up with really, I believe, hitting many, if not all, of the competencies. I'm going to stop sharing real quick because I need to kind of see a little bit. And what I'd like to do, my next slide is a demonstration. And so I want to, it's not a very long demonstration. This is a full coaching demonstration in about 15-ish minutes. So it's going to be fast. If we can pause the recording, 20 seconds, 14 minutes in that conversation. What did you notice? Client used several metaphors in the first 2 minutes. Yeah, this is a super metaphorical client. In fact, I'm working with her on a metaphor training that I'm going to be doing because she's so incredibly metaphorical, and it's just really an easy way of demonstrating the use of a metaphor through conversation. Please feel free to take yourself off of mute though. And what did you notice in the conversation?
I love the transformation of the plate. That was so powerful.
Yeah. And if we had just gone in, so you want to let's look at all of your contracts, and we could have gotten really down in the weeds, couldn't we? Versus what do we want to explore on this plate? It gives it distance. And I know we sometimes talk with our clients about getting a bird's eye perspective, or anything that's too big, maybe visualize it on a movie screen or something, to kind of create this distancing, but we can do it with simple things, right? With just looking at a plate.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that it felt like she was stepping back from herself and just kind of painting a picture of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Bird's eye view.
Yeah.
Another metaphor, but it is another way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. As the coach, using the client's metaphor to help her see her own thinking that was not serving her, metaphors helped explore without jumping down rabbit holes and getting bogged down. You guys are just so metaphorical. Yeah, the conversation flowed because we're just using the language of metaphor, and there's nothing threatening about looking at a plate. And it keeps me, the coach, from getting into a place of sounding like maybe judgment. And remember, for our clients, if they're bringing something forward that feels uncomfortable to them or they're not very happy with, anything that we say around that can sound judgmental, even if it's not judgmental on our part, because they're interpreting their own self-judgment at that moment. Talking about a plate and what's next on the plate and how might she do it, and getting a divided plate and not letting her food touch. I mean, that was all really deep work without any judgment attached to it, because we've all had full plates. We've all eaten out of divided dishes. Well, maybe all being a bit broad of a languaging, but many of us have experienced, that. And building on the metaphor, where's the next place on the plate to look at, or what else could be taken off the plate, or how do you determine what you keep on the plate and take off the plate? These things are all ways that we as coaches are also touching base with the client through the coaching conversation, but it's just done in a really artful way as a result of not going, how are we doing now? Where are we at now? I think we should maybe go explore here. I didn't tell her where to explore. I didn't tell her what to explore. She led me through that entire conversation. I did talk over her a couple of times because I heard the plate and I got super excited. And I kind of wish in hindsight I hadn't done that. Metaphors helped explore as a coach, using the metaphor to help her see her own thinking. It's really interesting though. Her brain had lit up because she was like, a full plate, what's fruitful? I used the language of low-hanging fruit specifically because of her plate and her fruitfulness that she was looking for. So I'm keeping in rhythm with the languaging that she's using, because I don't want to be like, oh, so where do you take your hands off the steering wheel? That would have been out of left field. It wouldn't have fit with where her brain was at. And it might have even stopped her. And I see this happen in coaching demonstrations all the time. The client throws out a metaphor. The coach doesn't pick up that metaphor. They bring in their own metaphor. And now they're trying to explain like the difference in the metaphors. Like now they're off road. They're not even doing coaching anymore. Now they're having a sort of a dialogue about the use of language. And it doesn't do anything to forward the client towards what was important to them. So the grounding of the metaphor, and also to help her to create actions, right? And it was the plate, Diane, that's great. The plate became a safe place. The plate was non-judgmental. The plate wasn't good or bad. The plate was just the plate. We all have them in our, in our kitchens. We held plates. And I loved the notion of the balanced meal. Thank you for bringing that forward also, because it's a very different way of looking at a plate. Like a really full plate might be like back when there used to be all you can eat buffets, right? Like you'd put like a whole entire bunch of stuff on your plate, or having a balanced meal and even portion control. Like if I've got these 3 sections filled in, then what's next? So.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that powerful demonstration. Really, really informative and lovely to watch. I have a curiosity at one moment in the coaching conversation. I'm curious as to kind of how you thought about it, because my brain was going in a different direction there. And I'm just wanting to learn from you. And maybe the time you had was limited too. When she said it seems like a luxury to choose what's on the plate, it felt to me at that moment, and maybe, it's just me, is almost there's something deeper that maybe I don't deserve the luxury to choose. Maybe my history, I have not learned I could have the luxury to choose. I felt like there's so much under the iceberg there. And I think you took her in a different way that got her to where she needs to think about, she can renegotiate and have the choice. But I was curious as to how you made a decision to not to.
That was definitely a choice point, because to your point, when she says, I've never had the luxury, I get my gruel and I like it. I mean, there's definitely a direction that a coach could have taken. I had 15 minutes or so to do this entire coaching demonstration. So I was trying to there's only so many metaphors. Now, in our longer conversations that she and I have, we'll follow things like that. But I think it's a beautiful choice point. It would have been a really lovely opportunity to explore, what is that relationship to that idea of being at choice?
Yes.
Right. I think that would have been a beautiful place to go with it. I did not, obviously, but I think it's definitely an underlying issue about how one sees their own value to be a choice. Right.
Yeah. Thank you for the comment.
Yeah. And I think that most of our clients, when you get down to underlying driving factors, these underlying driving factors are, am I worth it? Do I love myself? What's the difference between loving myself and doing all these actions that show love to myself versus actually really the being of loving myself? I was having that conversation with a client the other day, and, the difference between the being and the doing, right? Of what is self-love. And I think these places show up in coaching conversations all the time, because it is so rarely that the topic that the client brings up as their first, this is what I want to talk about today, is the real topic. Mm-hmm. It is often packed way underneath there. And so it's about creating safety and kind of digging out of it. But I mean, to your point, Jan, that is definitely, it would have been a really beautiful place to explore, given a bit more time.
15 minutes is crazy. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd like to say, though, that was a 15-minute presentation or a coaching conversation. It was a full coaching conversation. I like to say that to people because I hear a lot of times, I can't do coaching. I can't do a really thorough coaching session in 30 minutes. Like I have to have an hour. And my point is not that take the hour if you have the hour, that's wonderful, but you could do a full coaching conversation in 10 to 15 minutes also. Depending on the situation, that's a interesting story to explore. So I want to give you guys, I put into the chat a worksheet, and what this worksheet has in it is just different scenarios, and we're going to break you into rooms of like 3 or 4 people, and let you have like about 10 minutes or so to kind of explore some of these things. Some of them you'll have seen from earlier, but it'll give you a second chance to kind of noodle over them, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of do a debrief on what it is that you notices, because there's going to be more than one choice point that you'll have for exploring. Nanor, do you need help with that, or do you have that?
No, I'll do that.
Did everybody get to double click and download the worksheet that's in the chat? Okay, cool. So hopefully at least one person will have the worksheet in the breakout room.
I think I'm going to do 10 rooms. Let's see.
And the instructions, Nahid, are just to take a look at the worksheet, and as a group, just sort of talk about different choice points that might have shown up, or things like that trigger your thinking, or based on our conversation so far, areas that you might have gone to explore with that particular offering that the client gave. You're not getting an entire coaching thing. You're just getting one blurb that a client had said. But as coaches, pick up maybe 1 or 2 to just sort of, how would you each have navigated it? You don't have to do the same one either. You can really be flexible in the group.
Okay, Lyssa, it put you in a room, but just don't accept if you don't want to go.
Accept.
Okay. All right, guys, here we go. Any questions? We're all good to go. Oh, Jan? Any question or no?
No question. I just
have fun.
download the worksheet, but I'm sure somebody will have it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you should be able to get into breakout rooms now. So it's 12, 11.
Yeah, so give them like around the 9-minute mark. That'll give them 1 extra minute. So we'll pull them back. So they'll be back here at about the 21-minute mark. That'll give us a little bit of closing time. So I'm going to pause since I'm a co-host. Do we want to? Oh, wait.
Oh,
We're back. So I wanted to just ask folks, what were you noticing as you were in your breakout rooms? What showed up for folks? And please just speak up. And I can't hear you if you are talking, Allison.
Yeah. Well, when we stopped kind of fumbling around on the worksheet, we started to zero in on, there's an opportunity that we kind of have probably been missing around the curiosity and maybe not assuming when somebody uses some kind of a metaphor that we understand what they mean, and that there's an opportunity to, here, I'm going to use my metaphor now, pull the thread a little bit, to explore what it means to them.
Yeah. I think that's very similar. Nanor and I were talking, and I'm going to speak for you, so please correct anything I say wrong, but just the flip from her expectation that it's like, how does a coach use metaphors with their clients, to how do we listen to the metaphors our clients bring and leverage those in a way that is more meaningful to the client versus more meaningful to the coach. And what I was saying to Nanor too is, there's nothing wrong with a coach saying, I'm seeing a horizon line and I'm curious what you're seeing. The client will, if they resonate with that, they'll be like, yes, it's like a horizon line. Or they'll be like, no, it's not really a horizon line. It's much more like a, I don't know, whatever, right? And so at that point, you go with the metaphor that the client is now linking to. We want to follow the client. We want to have them be leading us in that way. But there's nothing wrong with bringing the metaphor forward, or even asking them, I had a client who was like wrestling, and this was in one of my earlier, I think it was in my MCC demonstration actually. And I had said, as you're viewing this wrestling that you're doing, what do you see? And she had come up with this tangled threads of dark, tangled, fuzzy, horrible threads. And so there's nothing wrong with asking the client to describe what it is, the experience that they're having either. So those things work, but then we honor that they brought that forward, and we find a way to then anchor where they want to go with that. So what would be different by the end of our conversation, and the client had said, I'd like to have some light on the threads. The illuminated threads. And so we were moving from the tangled dark skein of tangled threads to the illuminated thread. And that became the anchor to the container of the coaching conversation. Because then I could always ask, where are we on this illuminated thread? And she could say, not very well yet, still not illuminated, still dark and fuzzy. What needs to be explored next? What's the next fuzz? And I'll put into the chat, I have some different, I was prepared for this. There's a link to the slides. I also have a series on common coaching mistakes. It's free. You're welcome to that. The ICF knowledge assessment, that's changed though. So, but I do believe that my, the one that I created probably will help you. And then I also have mentor coaching and coaching supervision that I do with people. But just going back to this, anything else that you guys are learning as you go through this this webinar? Yes, please, Lori.
Yes, I'm from the South, and there's a lot of Southern slang that I grew up with. And as I, moved around and whatnot, I sort of got rid of that from my vocabulary. But what came forward was a big aha, like, a lot of that is metaphor, if not every, calling the pot, the kettle black, and, it's the pot calling the kettle black and all of that. It is like a powerful metaphor. So for me, it just like tied the two together. And instead of having any judgment around it, it's like, ooh, like I can really work with that with them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that so much. Daniel asked, a simile is a metaphor just as a specific, actually the slight difference between a simile and a metaphor is life is like a bowl of cherries. There's a distancing that happens in a simile, whereas I am wrestling with dragons is a metaphor, and it is the possession is mine. So I think that's the kind of the big difference between similes and metaphors. People will often interchange them, and like plates are really full, or I'm juggling something, right? But again, it's the I'm part that we're listening for. Yeah. Right. I have in one of them a hide button for, being perfect, perfectionism. And I have a metaphor program that I'm pulling together. I haven't done it yet, but if you go to my website and you download the demo, the slides, there's also a demo from a coaching demonstration I did in Malaysia at ICF Malaysia that I have with that. And you can sign up to get my newsletter, which is just for coaches. And it just says things like, hey, I'm going to be at ICF Orange County, or I have a program that's coming up if you're at all interested. So you can always sign up for my newsletter if you're at all interested in seeing what I'm doing. I'm also on LinkedIn, so please feel free to connect with me there. And then you don't have to get my newsletter. So I'm assigning myself the homework to listen for metaphoric language. Yay! I think you're going to just be like, how many metaphors show up? I think you're just going to be gobsmacked. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I will turn the reins back over to Nanor, and thank you so much for having me be here. I hope this was useful to you all.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, thank you, Lyssa. Maybe everyone, if you can put in chat, what are some gems or takeaways that you're taking from the event today? I think I'm going to give myself the same homework. Thank you for that idea. So Lyssa, thank you very, very much. This was, for me, this was so insightful. I just didn't think of it the way that you have brought to our attention, catching metaphors this way, like, see, even the word catching, now I'm catching it.
Yeah. Yes.
So now I'm aware. So thank you. This is going to definitely, I think, up level everyone's coaching if they hadn't thought of it in this perspective. So
I've
thank
had
you for that.
I've had other people on LinkedIn after they've been to this presentation shoot me like a thing through the LinkedIn going, I had this amazing coaching session once I was here. So feel free to tell me how you're using it and what works. And so thank you so much for having me, you all. I appreciate it greatly.
Of course. So everyone, expect this survey very short, well, by shortly, like within a week or so. And within there, again, you will find your ICF certificate as your 1.5 CCEU certificate. And also, please check out our website. We have another event that's coming up with Shirzad Shameen. And he is going to be talking about coaching reinvented. So check that out. It's on March 17th. And thank you so much for your time in coming here and joining us. So we'll see everyone soon again. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Are you going to hang on, Daryl?
Yeah, I just was, in case we wanted to do that and everything. I saw that Michael had to leave and Lori as well, but
Yeah. Oh, Lori's coming back. Perfect. Okay,
Okay.
let's admit her.
I will just wait 1 second before I share anything.
Yay. Thank you for coming back, Lori. Oh, wait, we can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
No, I was like, oh, I forgot to stay on. So
Yeah, I know Michael couldn't stay on, and then Nahid also had another commitment today as
Yeah.
well. So we'll officially begin this process
yeah.
on a different event, but let's go for it. What did you guys think?
I thought it was great. Because I think she was one of the presenters last year, and I wasn't able to be at that. So and I've known about her through other circles. So I was really glad that she was going to be here again and to hear this.
Oh, wait, sorry. Let me
You gotta
stop recording.
Oh.
You're going to record